Racist landlord evicts family. Then Baron Trump steps in and changes everything. The rain poured down in heavy sheets, drumming against the pavement like an angry rhythm. A young mother, Lisa Carter, stood shivering on the sidewalk, her arms wrapped tightly around her 2 children. Their suitcases sat beside them, soaked through from the downpour, their belongings hastily packed and thrown together. Behind them, the apartment building they had called home for the past 4 years loomed dark and empty. The front door, once welcoming, was now shut tight, a symbol of the cruelty they had just endured. Lisa wiped a tear from her cheek, though it was hard to tell if it was from the rain or the overwhelming sense of helplessness that had taken hold of her. Her 7-year-old son, Tyler, clung to her side, confused and scared, while her teenage daughter, Maya, stood silently, her face tense with a mixture of anger and sadness. They had nowhere to go, no backup plan, no family nearby, all because their landlord, a man named Richard Thompson, had decided they didn't belong. It had started subtly at first. Sideways glances, delayed maintenance requests, little comments here and there that Lisa tried to ignore. But then the notices started coming. The sudden increase in rent, the false accusations of noise complaints, the threats, and finally the eviction. No warning, no discussion, just a cold letter taped to their door, informing them they had 24 hours to vacate the premises. Lisa had pleaded with Thompson, asking for time, for understanding, but he had only sneered at her, muttering words that stung more than any slap ever could. "This isn't your kind of place," he had said with a smirk, before slamming the door in her face. Now, standing in the rain, Lisa felt a deep sense of betrayal. She had worked hard to give her children a stable home, doing everything right, paying rent on time, keeping the apartment spotless, following every rule. And yet, it hadn't been enough. She glanced at her phone, checking her bank account. One last time. There wasn't enough for a hotel. She had reached out to shelters, but there were wait lists. Her stomach twisted with anxiety. What was she supposed to do now? Then, as if the universe itself had heard her silent plea, something unexpected happened. A sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb, its tinted windows reflecting the neon glow of a nearby street lamp. Lisa instinctively pulled her children closer, unsure of who could possibly be approaching them at this hour. The driver's door opened, and a tall man stepped out, dressed in a crisp suit, his expression unreadable. He walked toward them with purpose, his shoes splashing in the puddles as he neared. "Lisa Carter?" he asked, his voice calm yet firm. Lisa hesitated before nodding. The man reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a business card, handing it to her. "I'm here on behalf of Baron Trump." Lisa blinked in confusion. The name sounded familiar. Of course, she had heard of him. But why would someone like Baron Trump be sending a representative to her? A single mother with no power, no connections, the man continued, as if sensing her hesitation. "Mr. Trump heard about what happened to you. He wants to help." Lisa's breath caught in her throat. Help? From a Trump? It didn't make sense. But before she could respond, the man gestured to the SUV. "Please come with me. You and your children shouldn't be out here like this." Lisa looked at her kids. Maya raised an eyebrow, skeptical, while Tyler just shivered against her side. Everything in her life had been falling apart, and now, out of nowhere, a lifeline had appeared. But was it real? Could she trust this? She had to decide, and fast, because whatever was coming next was about to change everything. Lisa hesitated, gripping Tyler's small hand tightly. The rain had soaked through her clothes, and the cold was seeping into her bones. But that wasn't why she was frozen in place. This didn't feel real. Strangers didn't just show up in the middle of the night offering help. Especially not powerful ones. Especially not someone like Baron Trump. Maya shifted beside her, arms crossed. Her skeptical glare locked onto the man in the suit. "How does he even know about us?" she asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. The man, who had yet to introduce himself, remained calm. "Mr. Trump was made aware of your situation through someone who wanted to help. That's all I can say for now." Lisa glanced at the business card, still clenched in her fist. The name printed on it didn't mean much to her, but the weight of what it represented did. Her entire life, people like Baron Trump had existed in a different world. One filled with privilege, power, and resources she could never even dream of. So why was someone like him suddenly reaching into hers? She wanted to ask a million questions, but the biting wind and the exhaustion in her children's eyes made the choice for her. With a deep breath, she nodded. "Okay," she said softly. The man opened the car door, motioning for them to get inside. Lisa helped Tyler climb in first, followed by Maya, who still looked unconvinced. She slid in last, the warmth of the leather seats immediately surrounding her. It was strange, sitting inside something so luxurious, when just minutes ago, they had been standing on a freezing sidewalk with nowhere to go. As the car pulled away, Lisa stared out the window, watching the city blur past. "Where are we going?" she finally asked. The man in the front seat turned slightly. "To a safe place where you can rest. Then, we'll talk." Lisa swallowed hard. The last 24 hours had been nothing but heartbreak and uncertainty, and now they were heading toward the unknown once again. But something told her that wherever they were going, it was about to change everything. Half an hour later, the SUV pulled into the driveway of what looked like a luxury townhome. It wasn't flashy, but it was bigger than anywhere Lisa had ever lived. The lights inside were warm, glowing through the rain, and for the first time all night, she felt a small flicker of hope. As the car came to a stop, the driver stepped out and opened the door for them. Lisa climbed out first, taking in her surroundings, while Tyler and Maya followed. A woman was already waiting at the door, dressed in a simple but elegant sweater. She looked kind. Her eyes filled with warmth as she smiled at them. "Come inside," she said, waving them in. The moment Lisa stepped through the door, the heat wrapped around her, instantly chasing away the cold. The living room was cozy, with a fireplace crackling softly in the corner. Everything about the place felt safe. Safe in a way Lisa hadn't felt in years. The woman led them to the couch and handed each of them a towel and a cup of warm tea. Lisa barely had time to process before the woman spoke again. "My name is Diane," she said gently. "I work for Mr. Trump." Lisa's fingers tightened around the mug. "Why is he helping us?" Diane took a breath, as if choosing her words carefully. "Because what happened to you and your family isn't right." She paused, her voice laced with something deeper. "Mr. Trump believes in justice, and he has the resources to do something about it." Lisa frowned. "He doesn't even know us." Diane's expression softened. "No, but someone who does reached out to him. A friend of yours, someone who knew what was happening, wanted to make sure you weren't left alone." Lisa blinked, her mind racing. Who? Who would have been able to reach someone like Baron Trump? Before she could ask, Diane continued. "Mr. Trump wants to help you fight back." Lisa's stomach twisted. "Fight back," she echoed. Diane nodded. "Your landlord, Richard Thompson, has a history. You're not the first person he's done this to." She leaned forward slightly. "But you might be the last." Maya sat up straighter. "What do you mean?" Diane's eyes flickered between them. "We've been gathering evidence. and with your help, we can take legal action. But more than that, Mr. Trump wants to make sure this never happens to anyone else again. Lisa's mind spun. Legal action. Against Thompson? She had spent so long feeling powerless, beaten down by a system that seemed rigged against people like her. And now, suddenly, she was being handed away to fight back. But was it really that simple? Lisa exhaled slowly. And what does he want? In return? Diane's lips curved into a small smile. Nothing. Lisa didn't believe that for a second. But before she could say anything, there was a soft knock at the door. Diane stood, moving toward it, and when she opened it, Lisa's breath caught, because standing in the doorway, tall, composed, and unmistakably who he was Baron Trump himself. Lisa's heart pounded as he stepped inside. His expression, calm but serious. He glanced at her, then at her children, and then he spoke. I think it's time we talk. The room fell silent. Lisa had no idea what was about to happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. Nothing in her life would ever be the same again. Lisa's throat went dry as Baron Trump stepped further into the room. His presence carried an undeniable weight, not just because of his name, but because of the way he carried himself. Calm, direct, like someone who was used to solving problems most people couldn't even dream of fixing. For a long moment, no one spoke. Maya, always the bold one, finally broke the silence. So, why are you here? Baron glanced at her, then back at Lisa. Because this shouldn't have happened to you, he said simply. And because I can do something about it. Lisa folded her arms, forcing herself to push past the shock. I appreciate the kindness, but people like you don't usually show up for people like us. Baron's expression didn't change. You're right, he admitted, but that's exactly why I'm here now. Lisa wasn't sure what to say to that. Diane spoke up. Lisa, we've looked into your landlord. Richard Thompson has a long history of discrimination and illegal evictions. He's been getting away with it for years because no one has had the resources to fight him. She paused, letting the words sink in. Until now, Lisa's hands curled into fists at the mention of Thompson's name. She could still see the smug look on his face when he'd thrown her family out, like he knew she had no power to stop him. But now, maybe that was changing. Baron sat down across from her, leaning forward slightly. I want to take this to court. Not just for you, but for everyone else he's hurt. Lisa hesitated. The idea of going to court was terrifying. Legal battles took time, energy, things she wasn't sure she had left. But then she thought about her kids, about how Maya had to watch their things get thrown out like trash, about how Tyler had cried, confused and scared. She looked at them now. Maya's jaw was clenched, her hands balled into fists. Tyler was quiet, but his eyes were wide with hope. Lisa exhaled. What if we lose? Baron didn't flinch. We won't. The certainty in his voice sent a shiver down Lisa's spine. For the first time in days, she felt something other than fear. She felt possibility. The next few weeks were a blur of preparation. Lawyers were brought in. Victims of Richard Thompson's discrimination came forward, sharing their stories. One after another, people who had been silenced finally had a voice. Lisa found herself at the center of it all. At first, she wasn't sure she was strong enough to go through with it. But every time doubt crept in, she thought of her kids. She thought of the countless families Thompson had pushed onto the streets. She thought of how tired she was of being afraid, and so she stood her ground. The courtroom was packed on the day of the hearing. Lisa sat beside her lawyer, her hands cold but steady. Across from her, Thompson looked just as smug as ever. But there was something different this time. a flicker of nervousness in his eyes. Because he wasn't just facing one woman anymore. He was facing an entire movement. Baron Trump sat a few rows behind Lisa, watching silently. He had told her from the start. He wasn't here to steal the spotlight. He was here to make sure justice was served. And when the evidence was presented, when witness after witness testified against Thompson, it became clear justice was coming. It didn't take long for the judge to reach a decision. Thompson was found guilty of illegal eviction practices, racial discrimination, and multiple violations of housing laws. He was ordered to pay damages to every tenant he had wronged. But more importantly, his properties were seized. His reign of terror was over. Lisa couldn't breathe as the verdict was read. It was over. They had won. Tears burned in her eyes. She turned to Maya and Tyler. Maya, the girl who had been so full of anger and doubt, was smiling, really smiling. For the first time in weeks, Tyler squeezed her hand, his little face full of relief. And for the first time in a long time, Lisa felt safe. That night, as she stood outside the courthouse, Baron approached her. "You did this," he said, nodding at her. Lisa let out a breathless laugh. "I didn't do it alone." Baron offered a small smile. "Maybe not, but you fought for it." He looked at her kids, then back at her. "You ever need anything, you know how to reach me." Lisa studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you." Baron didn't say anything else. He simply gave her a nod before walking away, disappearing into the night. Lisa watched him go, then looked down at her children. For the first time, in forever, the future didn't feel so terrifying. It felt like a new beginning.